What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are back with another episode of Lions Latest, going through the latest Detroit Lions news, and there is a lot to discuss in today's video. We are back with our first pre-recorded video in a while. We've done a lot of live streams recently, but it's kind of good to be back doing this. I don't know. I mean, the live streams are cool. I don't have to edit, but it's all right. We're back. We got a lot of Lions news to discuss, as this is probably the busiest time of what we could call the roster Olympics, where you're kind of just moving pieces around all over the place. I mean, teams are claiming players, they're letting players go. We just had the 53-man cut down, so there's tons of players that are available. Teams are building up their practice squad, they're placing them in different sections. So there's just a lot going on right now, and this will continue, but this is pretty much the busiest time for a lot of teams. With that being said, the Lions have made some moves today that we need to discuss, other moves that are going to be made going forward. So let's get it started.
Fired up. It's made a great decision.
Great teammates, coaches, and other people who want to be Super Bowl champions. And we are. We're going to do it this year.
And we're going places, because we want to go places.
Touchdown, Detroit Lions!
Before long, we're going to be the last one standing.
Welcome everybody to our video. Glad you guys are here, and we're back with another Lions latest video. Like I said, there's a lot to really touch on in this video. Some of this is probably not super surprising. Some of these moves were kind of anticipated. It was just more so, what player would it be? Not necessarily would the Lions make this move, but who would the player be that the Lions make the move for? And that is what we are starting to see today. But again, there's still going to be changes that are going to happen going forward. You have players, for example, like Levi, who made it through the 53-man cuts, because you can't place him on IR before the 53-man cuts, or you'll never get him back for the season, because then he's out for the year. So guys like that made it through the 53-man cuts, if you feel like he probably won't be ready that early anyway, you can put him on IR now. He's going to miss the 4 weeks, but it does open up a roster spot. Then you can add another player to your roster. So there's going to continue to be a lot of moves happening, but we have kind of the beginning of those moves starting today. And of course, the biggest one probably is the Lions finding what could be their new backup quarterback, while at the same time letting go of who was their backup quarterback, I guess, for less than 24 hours. But we're going to get to that in a second. I first want to start off with this practice squad update. This is one of those things that will continue to change. It's going to move around during the season. Teams are going to protect players on their practice squad. They're going to bring players off of their practice squad to play in games. So there's going to be a lot of movement here, and you can expect that the Lions are going to be signing some players that were not with them throughout the preseason. But for the Lions, they have brought a lot of players back as of now. Again, this can change. Players can be taken off of this list. They can be let go. Players can be picked up by other teams. So this can change. But for now, the Lions have 13 players listed on their practice squad. You can hold up to 16 players, I believe, again, this season. So here are the 13 players currently the Lions have on their practice squad. This is subject to change. And again, expect other additions from other teams, just like we did last season and, like you do every season. So at the top, of course, we have Tom Kennedy, the receiver. It's good to have him back, and it's really nice. I mean, he had a great preseason. A security blanket on your practice squad. I mean, I don't know if we're going to be protecting him during the year, but it does kind of feel like that. Like, okay, you're like, yeah, he's still here, though. He's still here. Another receiver we also brought back is Maurice Alexander, who I thought had a really good preseason. It's just kind of went under the radar. He didn't make enough splash plays, specifically in the receiving game, to really upend anybody, and the Lions only kept 5 receivers on their 53-man roster, so it was going to be extremely difficult to take someone's spot. He was unable to do that, but he did have a good preseason in his own right. He did what he was asked to do in terms of the receiving game. He caught his passes that were thrown his way, and he had a couple of big returns, as well as I just threw my pencil. All right, continuing. Justin Jackson is also back with the Lions on the practice squad. That's a really, really cool one to have back. He had a really nice preseason for the Lions, but this does make me think of kind of the Craig Reynolds situation. Remember, we got to see him in the preseason, and then the Lions ultimately brought him back a little bit later when they needed Craig Reynolds, and we saw what he did during the season. So maybe something similar kind of goes down with that. It's a little bit different, but maybe something similar happens later in the year. But as long as he's able to stick around our practice squad, we'll continue to keep seeing the player. And hey, if he shines on the practice squad team, then maybe the Lions give him some love during the season. And of course, when things pop up, you just might need him, because right now the Lions only got 3 running backs on their roster. We're going to talk about that. Garrett Griffin is back as well. He was one of the earlier cuts that the Lions made, more of the blocking tight end, but he did take some pretty high reps, and he also played at the fullback position while Jason Cabinda was out. So you do wonder a little bit if the Lions ever feel like at the beginning of the season because Jason Cabin is going to miss the first 4 games. They need a guy that can play fullback. Maybe they look that way, possibly. I'm not saying they will, but they could. AJ Parker, really excited to see that this guy is back on the practice squad. I mean, I didn't really know if he would or not, but he's back. That feels good as well, just to have AJ Parker. We had a couple of guys like that last year that were on our practice squad, and you just never know, you might need them. I believe that happened with Nick Roby-Coleman. If you remember, we put him in, we had to put him on the outside, which was not ideal, but cornerbacks can be really hard to come by when you're during the season. It's hard to find those guys during the season if you need them. So having AJ Parker on the practice squad, it just feels good to have him in the building, right? It feels like that's not the kind of guy you want to lose. You understood the move, but you don't want to lose him. So having him back on the practice squad feels nice. James Houston, same thing there. He was a 6th round pick. The fact that, because these young guys with less than 4 years of experience in the NFL, they have to go through waivers. Teams put out a claim, it goes through the waiver order, and if anybody puts out a claim, they're going to get that player. No one did that for these guys. So a guy like James Houston, being able to get him back, again, he didn't really show much during the preseason, 6th round pick, so you would like to see a little bit more, and I actually think practice squad with some of these guys is the perfect spot to be in. Think of Tavante Beckett. Now, that one didn't necessarily work out. He didn't stick around, but I think for a guy like this, where you can kind of play around with, okay, how do we want to utilize him? What could be the future of this player? Is it more off-ball linebacker than we kind of used him for in the preseason because we kind of tried to take things off his plate, or is it continuing to use him as an edge rusher? And if that's the case, maybe build up, his body a little bit more for that. That way he can find more success on the field, and the practice squad is a great spot to be for that. Savion Smith as well. He was around with us last season, and I thought he had a pretty good preseason and training camp. The guy battled, and I think he surprised people. He turned some heads. Not enough so to maybe make the roster, but he definitely showed some growth. Jared Davis is back on the practice squad, which is just cool that you can have veterans on your practice squad, but Jared Davis is still here, and I think that's awesome. I don't think Jared Davis by any means had a bad preseason. I just thought Josh Woods, I thought he earned the role as an off-ball linebacker. The Lions went that direction, but I thought Jared Davis did pretty well, especially as the preseason went on. His last game I thought was arguably maybe his best game. So it's cool to have him back as well. And, again, you may see these guys during the season. Derek Deese Jr., another rookie. This is the undrafted free agent we picked up out of San Jose State. We got to see him a very little bit in the pass game, but you also got some presence felt, and specifically as a run blocker for him. But he can do some things with the ball in his hands. Obinna Eze, again, another guy just feels like a perfect spot for him to be. Put him on the practice squad. There could be a future element with him, but as Dan Campbell said, going back a little bit, this is the player that he kind of just needs to learn how to be a professional in the NFL. He moved over here. You can see kind of the learning curve that he's going through right now. Hard Knocks has kind of showcased that. I think this is a good spot for him to be on. Again, just an opportunity to really get a good feel of the guys that he's working with, the coaches, really build up Obinna Eze going forward, because he wasn't ready right now to be on a 53-man roster, but I love having him in the building for sure, because undeniably the guy has a very athletic skill set that is very seemingly untapped in terms of what his potential is. He just hasn't played a lot of football. Bruce Hector, a guy they gave Lions gave a pretty good shot to in their final preseason game to potentially maybe earn that final interior defensive line position. He did not, but he is back, and he had a solid preseason. Meanwhile, the Lions did make a claim today and picked up an interior defensive lineman, so we're going to talk about that next. Anthony Pittman, this one's great too. At first, I was like, wait, why did we not bring back Anthony Pittman? Because his name wasn't immediate that the Lions brought him back. Then I finally saw it, and I was like, okay, good, that makes sense. I would have been very surprised that Anthony Pittman got an opportunity to come back to the Lions, and the Lions wouldn't put him back on the practice squad. The role that he played in preseason was pretty big. He's also a special teams valuable player for the Lions. I thought he kind of trended downward a little bit as the preseason went on, just in terms of his effectiveness playing as an edge or a Sam linebacker for the Lions. But I thought with how much they utilized him, this is a guy that they would definitely look to bring back if possible. And then, of course, you have Dan Skipper. And if you remember, if you saw the Hard Knocks episode, I don't know for sure if this is who Hank Fraley was talking about when they were going through kind of the cuts and giving you sort of a preview into it. He did say that, he would keep all 10 guys if they could. And I'm thinking he's possibly talking about Dan Skipper, who is the opposite tackle of Matt Nelson, because they kept the other 4 guys along that second unit offensive line. So I'm thinking he was talking about Dan Skipper. So I guess for Hank Fraley, he got him back on the practice squad. So there you go. So that is the Lions' current practice squad. Again, this will change. Maybe by the time we're watching it, it has changed. But as of now, this is what we are looking at. So with that being said, I want to dive into the 2 moves, or the 2 additions the Lions made today, along with some corresponding moves to make those additions possible. First one, let's touch on it, is the Lions adding an interior defensive lineman. Now, this is something that I think a lot of us kind of anticipated was going to happen, especially because we're not really sure where Levi is at with this injury, but this makes it makes more sense to me that, again, the Lions, and we'll get to it in a second, would possibly put Levi on an IR. Again, I don't know what his timetable is, to open up a roster spot to bring possibly the guy back that they ended up waiving. We'll talk about that in a minute, make it make sense. The Detroit Lions did go out and add another interior defensive lineman. Todd Wash spoke to this, saying that this is something that they discussed, is they wanted to add another interior, kind of a big body in the inside for the Lions, which would give them more flexibility with a player like Aleem McNeil, who they were utilizing a little bit more at the 3-tech position, which is an outside shade of an offensive guard, basically kicking him out a little bit more. Isaiah Buggs allowed them to do that, but they need maybe another guy in there so that they can do that with Aleem, which kind of comes off of the fact that we don't have Levi. He's getting opportunities kicked out a little bit more. When Levi comes back, this may not be as necessary, but in the meantime, this was probably going to happen. Demetrius Taylor did well on the inside, but he's not a big body nose tackle. That's not really him, even though he played a lot of nose for the Lions and they kind of mixed it up with him there. He's not really that build. Of course, as we said, they cut a guy like Bruce Hector. So the Lions put in a claim for defensive tackle Benito Jones. I think I'm saying that name. I should not be messing up. Benito Jones. He has been in the league for only a few years. He was an undrafted player back in 2020 out of Mississippi, a 6'1", 316-pound defensive tackle. So there you go. That's that size. That's pretty similar to an Aleem McNeil. I guess it's kind of in that ballpark. Now, I wouldn't say he's as agile or as athletic, I guess, which is kind of a broad term, as Aleem McNeil is, but he definitely brings some of that girth, in the words of Todd Wash, that they were looking for that position. He is specifically a guy that seems like he's probably at his best from either 0 technique or 1 technique, not much further outside of that. One big reason is because of his length. The guy has sub 33-inch arms. Length is something that I think you can see a lot when you watch film if it's going to be an issue, and it does show up sometimes, especially when he is trying to kick out and just some of his usage there, but there hasn't been a lot of film, so let's make that clear. There really hasn't. He hasn't played in a regular season game. Most recently, Benito Jones was with the Miami Dolphins. In 2020, he was on the practice squad / active roster, which was really cool because you saw through the preseason how he kind of worked his way up into a role there. And then in 2021, he was mainly on the practice squad for the Miami Dolphins. And he could be that girth that the Lions are looking for. Now, there's no guarantee. Maybe he's not. Maybe the Lions move on and they don't keep him around. But from what I've seen, and again, we're looking at preseason film here, this past preseason, this 2022 preseason, we did get to see him a lot in more higher reps. I've seen there is definitely some things to like about this player, and you can just see the natural power that this player has. Of course, being 6'1", he has some natural leverage on the inside, and again, he is at his best working against centers specifically, and you can kind of put him in a shade that doesn't work too bad because he has a pretty explosive initial get off, which we're going to talk about. But when working against centers, this is a player that does show a lot of just natural power, and you see it consistently. I'm not just talking like 3 or 4 clips I saw, like, yeah, he kind of got a little movement there on the offensive line. Like, usually almost every single snap you see him, he is pushing someone back into the backfield with that initial punch, and also kind of the way that he gets off the line. He does show some burst, specifically kind of just in the launch off the line of scrimmage. I wouldn't say like it's a ton of ground that he covers, but there is a launch off the line of scrimmage. Of course, when you're playing over the ball like that, you can see it, so you should be able to get off maybe a little bit quicker, and he does that. You can see that. One of my favorite parts, and I think this is what's helped him a lot, is he has very consistent hands, gets his hands really low, gets under the chest of an offensive lineman, and you'll see him just kind of lift a center back. I thought it was a little bit more hit and miss, specifically with his pad level, even though he's more often than not getting good pad level, and again, being 6'1", he kind of has that naturally. When he doesn't win that battle and he gets on top and someone's able to kind of get underneath him, that's when things go really bad. Specifically, there was like a double team block against I think it was the Atlanta Falcons, which was not very good. As you can see, he kind of lost the leverage battle immediately off the line of scrimmage, and he was just pushed back multiple yards. So it's important that he wins that right off the snap, but more often than not, he usually does, and he shows a pretty nice jump off the line with also really heavy hands. I think that's the best way to describe him. Very heavy hands. Some credit that it's preseason, so you kind of expect this, but just in terms of pursuit, effort throughout the play, kind of working himself through a play, that's in a pass down situation, he's trying to pass rush, or that's a run that's getting away from him, he's trying to pursue it. There is a lot of effort seemingly there. He doesn't really stop on plays. That's not to say he usually gets involved in the play that's away from him. I think that's very noticeable, and really what I thought, this is to the pass rush side, when he got pass rush, it was pretty much every single time with the second effort. It wasn't with like I beat him right off the line. It was more so with the second pass rush move, and usually that he would get double teamed in the interior, really be persistent and just stick with it. There are a couple of issues that I seem to note, and man, this is a young player, okay, and we really haven't seen, I don't think, a ton of this guy. I looked at all of his preseason games, but one thing is that specifically you can see that his base isn't consistent, and that shows up against, you know, combos, double team blocks. You don't see him always getting a great base after kind of that initial lunge off the line of scrimmage. You don't always see him settle down extremely well, which is why it fits him a little bit more to shade and be a little bit more attacking, I think, along the defensive line, because he doesn't have a consistent always anchor against the run. Sometimes it looks really good, sometimes it doesn't. When it looks good, it's usually a one-on-one block against the center, and that's where he can hold up, and it stems from right off the beginning of the play. He gets in your chest, gets good pad level, he gets good hand placement, and he shows kind of that mauling power to hold off. Now, he doesn't have ideal length either, as we touched on, and that still shows up from the interior, whether it's trying to fill a lane and make a tackle, whether, you know, stack and shed, make a tackle. You don't always see that length. Creating separation and distance between an offensive lineman isn't something you always see. They can be very kind of tight together where he has to really get up on guys to try to create separation, but lengthwise he's not getting a lot of that. Covering ground, pass rushing situation and against the run, that first step might be good off the line of scrimmage, get himself in a good spot, but kind of finishing, getting into a spot where he can kind of finish the play, covering ground on pass rush reps, say he's trying to work around an offensive lineman. And again, you don't see a lot of position flexibility. It's not to say he didn't kick out to, like, you know, the 2 or the 3 from time to time, because he did, and I actually think he looks pretty good in head up situations. Sometimes length pops up there, but for the most part he's pretty good head up with the center from what I've seen, at least in the preseason film that I've watched. So this is definitely a nose tackle. This is the girth that the Lions are looking for. Now, as a pass rusher, I wouldn't say he's a big time pass rushing threat. That's not what he is, which makes sense. It's not how he's built. He was a run stopping interior defensive lineman, which makes sense. He's got a lot of power. He kind of just runs through people, and he plays with fantastic effort. In terms of pass rushing, you do still get some wins, but it's not all the time. Of course, he comes off the field on sub downs, which you would hear too as well, but you do see that he has some pass rush wins. Now, usually he tries to go to a bull rush, but everything stems off of that for him. Now, sometimes his bull rushes can just kind of stall out where he stops getting movement, and I think, again, sometimes he doesn't always cover a lot of ground with his bull rush. He might get a couple, you know, a little jolt back initially, and then it kind of stalls out. But where he does have success is usually stemming off of the bull rush initially, whether that's a push-pull, whether that's just utilizing his hands, a swim move over top, which he uses really well against zone runs as well. He's active with his hands. There was a rep, I think it was against Atlanta. I'll be showing the clip. Don't know if that's the right team, but just watch how he disengages kind of with the wipe away of the offensive lineman here. That was, I mean, that looked really good, you know, to disconnect like that. So he doesn't always have that finishing ability. You'll see it like when he tries to wrap around in a stunt or a twist, or if he's trying to just work around an offensive lineman. You don't always see that ability to do so, but he has very active hands, which is one of his biggest strengths, run or pass. Look at this one with the push and then pull down, and then this next play with the swim over top, grabs left shoulder and just swims right over top. Hand fights and the power at the point of attack that he has is noticeable. However, some of the issues of creating distance between an offensive lineman and finding a strong base, that way he can really separate and make a tackle, do show up. However, in some of these zone runs, he does look like they're trying to move a boulder. Seems to have more than enough foot quickness and agility to play an interior role in this defense and to shade technique, but as you can see, some of the contact balance isn't ideal, and here's another example of sort of the length showing up. This is the girth that the Lions were looking for on the interior, and they got it. So what do they have to do? Well, you have to open up a roster spot if you claim a player. They ended up waiving running back Jermar Jefferson. Now, that's my guy, but he still made the 53. That's all I was going off. No, but with that being said, that means the Lions only have 3 running backs. I kind of doubt they only hold 3 running backs. Again, they do have Justin Jackson on their practice squad, but with that, as we kind of touched on earlier, guys like Levi, because I don't know what they're looking at for him, what his timeline is. They may just want to get him back to practice, so they may not touch that. You know, you got guys like Iffy, things like that. I don't know what his timeline is, but if the Lions do want to place one of those guys on IR, have him out for a few weeks, it would open up a roster spot. So he's going to have to go through waivers, which there's no guarantee that he's actually going to make it back to the Lions. I don't know, but he's going to have to go through waivers. If he does, Lions could bring him back to the practice squad, or they could try to put him back on the roster, and they could do that by possibly opening up a spot that way instead of just cutting someone else, because then at that point you would have just cut the other guy originally, right? So you could put someone on IR that made it through the 53, do that sort of not out of the season, and then you can open up that spot, get the player back. I think one of those two will likely happen, either practice squad or roster. I would think the Lions, I could definitely see them trying to get him back on the roster, but he'll have to make it through waivers first. That's the risk with it. But they may feel a little bit better because now they got Jackson back on the practice squad. I don't know. They're running a risk here, but we'll see what happens. They got their guy that came available, and they needed that girth, and it kind of gives me a thought of where maybe a guy like Levi is at. So with that, let's take a look at the backup quarterback position, because if you haven't heard already, it happened. It happened at like 9 or something this morning. I remember seeing the alert pop up on my phone that the Detroit Lions released a quarterback, David Blough, and I saw that and I was like, oh, they must have got a quarterback. I think that's all it said. And this, again, this wasn't like a big shock. I think we talked about in our streams, we didn't anticipate that David Blough was like, hey, he won the job, he's the backup. Like, we didn't anticipate that. You know, we said interior defensive line is something to watch, as well as quarterback, as well as I said offensive tackle. We'll see if that comes true. But the Lions think they found their quarterback, because remember what Dan Campbell said: if we don't feel like he's a clear upgrade, then why do it? Now, that doesn't mean that it's a guarantee that this guy is the guy that they think that he might be and he sticks around, but it makes it sound like the Lions feel pretty confident that he is, or at least a clear upgrade over what they had in David Blough. I won't spend too much time on the whole David Blough situation, but again, this was kind of expected. I mean, he did make the 53, but this was expected. He didn't have, you know, a great preseason. Yeah, he made some creative plays, and I definitely think, you know, that he had a better training camp / preseason than Tim Boyle did, but all in all, neither of them did very well. The Lions were just kind of, I think, holding it to see if someone popped available that they would want, and Nate Sudfeld did, so the Lions made that move. And apparently, according to Ian Rappaport, they were considering possibly trying to make a trade for Nate Sudfeld, you know, if he would have just stuck on the San Francisco 49ers. However, he ended up becoming available, so the Lions didn't have to do that. And that's something we also discussed, is it's possible the Lions could have looked at that option as well. Sudfeld hasn't really played a lot in the NFL, specifically in regular season games. He's been in the league for a little while. Back in 2016, he was a round 6 draft pick out of Indiana. He played 4 years at Indiana. A 6'6", 235-pound quarterback. This is a big dude. To some people, be a little bit like, oh, that's nice, after seeing all those passes batted down at the line of scrimmage. I mean, that could still happen. It does. It happens with tall quarterbacks, you know, it can definitely happen. But it might feel a little good to see that. However, there isn't a lot of film to really look at when you see him in the regular season. He was put in the Eagles game, and they were kind of, I guess, like tanking at that time when they did that, so he didn't really play much in that game. He had like 5 completions. It was kind of a disaster. I actually tracked every play in that game. Wasn't very good. There was a lot of sacks, a lot of underneath passes. Then by the time they got to the end of the game, where he didn't really throw many passes, he was just kind of chucking them up, and they were just running vertical. There was not much to the offense when he came in the game. But with that said, because again, I think they were trying to lose, actually. But with that said, he did play a little bit going back to 2017. He played against the Dallas Cowboys in the game that they lost 6-0. He completed a high amount of his passes, like 130 yards. Not a most explosive stat line there for sure, but it was very, you know, young in his career. And he didn't look bad, but one thing that stuck out for sure was the amount of sacks that he was taking in that game. He got under pressure, just didn't always seem like he knew where to go with the football, but that was finding a check down. So had a fumble in that game, which is something that popped up in the preseason as well. We'll talk about that. But didn't look great. It's just kind of getting through things. And he was young at that time. So recently, he was with the San Francisco 49ers. Now, the 49ers brought back Jimmy Garoppolo, and they also had Brock Purdy, who was a late-round pick, I believe, from this year's draft. So they kept him around as well. So they got their 3. So they let go of Nate Sudfeld. And now Nate Sudfeld, who had a pretty darn good preseason, I should say, and if you watch his preseason, he played against 2 teams in our division. He played against the Packers and Vikings, and his best games definitely took place against those 2 teams. He didn't really play much against the Houston Texans. He also had a pick in that game, and we'll take a look at the pick. But the other 2, he played a little bit more, and you could see that he did pretty well in those games. Not a lot to go off of here based on, you know, regular season and the wins and stuff that he had. The quarterback market wasn't great. I mean, it just wasn't. Trying to find it back, if you just go through their names, it wasn't great. But it was very clear when watching him, just after, you know, watching Tim Boyle and David Blough in those 3 preseason games, this guy seems to have, I would just say, much more consistent arm talent. I mean, that seems obvious as soon as you kind of watch the guys. Just inconsistency, right? Not kind of being all over the place. Now, again, situation that you're in can affect that, but he still was much more consistent with where he was putting the ball. There wasn't a lot of missed passes, and when they were usually the same way, but they still weren't like out of control misfires. They were understandable how he missed the pass. When you saw him, the first pass that I saw, I think it was against the Vikings. I was trying to scroll through and figure out where he started at. First pass I saw, just take a look at this and then we'll kind of get into it. Look at this rollout. They did a lot of this with San Fran for him in the preseason, which is a lot of what Jared Goff does within this offense. A lot of rollout, a lot of play action. We know San Fran does a lot of that with their, you know, wide zone scheme. So you see this throw immediately and you're like, oh, that's pretty good. I mean, off platform, that's a pretty good ball that he just laid up there. that like was the first play that I saw. So immediately gave me a great impression on Nate Sudfeld. I was like, oh, this might be a guy. This might be a guy right here. And you saw actually quite a few of passes like that, but the biggest thing that probably stuck out to me isn't necessarily where the ball was always ending up. It's more so how he was deciding where to go with the football and just his control and confidence within the offense. One thing in Hard Knocks that you could hear Dan Campbell saying is kind of like rally the guys together, things like that. And you just saw a much more, especially from 2017, calm and seemingly confident quarterback when the ball was in his hands. Just much more comfortability when figuring out where to throw the football, when kind of going through reads of the defense, looking off defenders, utilizing pump fakes, moving coverage. It wasn't very robotic where it just kind of looked like this is where the ball is going, I'm putting it there. It wasn't really like that. He looked much more calm, and I think maybe the biggest improvement that I noticed is he didn't take the sacks that I saw him take in the small sample size with Philly. He seemingly knew where to get to with the football when things broke down. Usually it was a check down. Now there was one sack in there, I believe, and there was also the fumble, but for the most part, he was able to find where his check down outlets were. Speaking to him physically, I thought he had a pretty fast throwing motion when he needed to, his ability to get the ball out of his hands quickly, and it was really nice to see him kind of dial it down in short yardage situations when the field got more condensed or when they were underneath routes. His ability to kind of take power off of passes and make it a much more catchable ball. I mean, some of those passes, yeah, they were drops, but they weren't like the most catchable that we've seen, right? They weren't that really in the preseason. Some of these passes he's throwing underneath look very catchable. They look very receiver friendly, that he was kind of just laying up there for receivers to grab underneath. You can throw a lot of off-platform passes consistently accurate, it seems. I think a big part of that is the way that he throws the ball normally, is that he doesn't really kind of follow through. He doesn't use his lower body to really follow through with his passes, so it doesn't need that when he's on the run or something to really like have this motion to really have passes accurate. He seemingly throws and puts a lot of power kind of in his back leg, and he kind of just pulls through that with his upper body. And the only times that I felt like he got inaccurate and things got a little sporadic with his passes is when he didn't always get to kind of roll over with his passes, specifically in the upper body, when he kind of got stopped short, when things were just kind of like alligator armed out there. That's when passes seemed to get up a little bit on him. There was also when he kind of stepped up and, you know, was jumping a little bit, but it seems that he can throw on the run pretty consistently accurately, and he looked actually very comfortable in that, not always just taking the check down, but getting into the second and third levels while trying to hold defenders doing the same thing. So a lot of what you see us do with Jared Goff as well, you saw kind of them do with the San Francisco 49ers. And we always say timing passer. This is it was kind of a breath of fresh air. I mean, in a little bit, and this isn't to take shots at our other guys. It was just, he was making routine passes pretty consistently with San Fran. I mean, that comes into timing as well, but like the easy passes he was converting. There wasn't like, oh, there's an out route, he missed that one. Like, nah, he was consistent. I mean, if it was an easy pass, he was making the routine passes easy. It was a slant, there it is. It's a flat, there it is. They weren't getting all over the place on him where you just didn't know where the ball was going to be every time. It was pretty consistent. So the easy passes he was making, well, they looked easy. And like I said, he's very tall. He stands tall in the pocket. I think another improvement that I noticed, again, just in a small sample size, is the way that he kind of had a feel, specifically in the pocket, to move around a little bit in the pocket and kind of evade pressure while also keeping his eyes downfield. We talked about like finding those checkdowns. He does that. But some of the big plays that he had moving in the pocket, kind of just sliding away from the pass rush. Just looked much more in command. Definitely my favorite part always comes from moving guys in coverage. Now, they don't give us the best view of this, and I'm going to have to cut these short because you know how copyright is. But I love when guys move defenders, and you really get a nice sense of like how comfortable a guy is within an offense with some passes that they make. And that was clear with him in some of these throws. First off, the first one I want to show you is this 3rd and 13 he had against Green Bay. I bring this up because, again, we talk about all these passes being batted down at the line of scrimmage. Well, how about this one? Do you see the little pump fake that he kind of puts in there, right? He's not out of control rushing the throw to just say, get it out of my hand, even though you saw a little bit of that, and it can happen. He wasn't rushing it. In certain situations, you rush passes, but not this one. He let it develop, but he also had that little jab in there to get the defender to go up. When he got back down, he had no chance to get back up on it, kind of like when you're on a trampoline, right? You jump up. It's like, I can't jump back up again. It doesn't. So you see a little fake, and then the delivery. Also, another was underneath passes against the Vikings. Now, I don't know if this is something that he was really trying to do, but he get a little double clutch in there, kind of just, takes a lot of, steam off of this pass on a little arrow out underneath here against the Vikings, gets man coverage, got his matchup, kind of drops it in there, a little bit away from defenders as well, throwing this touchdown. You see him use his eyes, and actually that can work against you, right? There's sometimes when you try to move somebody and they don't move, specifically in zone coverage. They all got their eyes on you. So in zone, you can really move players, not as much in man coverage. But here you had an underneath underneath pass, and you had like the 2 out routes, the 6 going on the same side of the field formation. It was a 2-on-1 here for the quarterback, and you can see how he's trying to pull that linebacker to the outside receiver, comes back to the inside route, but the underneath defender didn't really jump to the outside, and he ended up throwing it right to the defender. But that kind of thing is understandable. You can see what he was trying to set up with the play. It wasn't like he just blindly snapped and threw it at him. You can see that he was trying to move the guy and set it down underneath. Still not a good play, but you can see what he's doing. You can see him move guys. This pick up against the Vikings, you can see he's clearly holding this underneath defender, and then at the last second he comes back middle, a little bit behind him, but he didn't have to stare the route down. Puts it over there and gives him a chance. Now, we talk about pass getting up on him. There's this comeback route that he threw. The thing that you like about this is he's throwing this before the receiver's coming out of his break, right? And he's trying to put it in a spot, kind of anticipate this pass, but he doesn't really get over with that pass, and maybe that leads to it being a little off from where he would like that to be. But you see a little bit of a touch on kind of a level 2 type of throw there. See a little touch on the ball and giving him an opportunity before he even comes out of his break. This on a straight drop. He doesn't even have to turn his back to the defense. He uses his eyes to just stare down the middle of the field, hold those safeties, and then boom, right over top. They have no chance to react. It's a one-on-one, but the guy falls down. By the way, this Packers throw just looks even cooler from this angle there. He was pretty impressive throwing on the run, which we Lions do a lot of play action anyway. Now, some of the clear notes that I had against it is there was a lot of false starts, not all on the quarterback, but that is something to note. There was a lot of false starts in those games. I'm not going to put that on him, but it's something to note. He did have a fumbled snap, and there was also a fumble with the Eagles, the pick, of course, and we kind of looked at that one. But there was also another fumbled snap. Wasn't a very good snap, but he did fumble the snap. I think they ended up getting back on it, but it was a fumbled snap. It seems like specifically when working under center, he can lack some of the depth that he's getting in his dropbacks. This happens kind of in bootleg situations. Sometimes it looks like he's lacking depth where he's taking really small steps, the first couple steps. Now you're trying to time it up with your running back, but even just straight drops, some of the depth that he gets sometimes seems to lack, and it could get him into some trouble in some of those quick passes where it's like, hey, he's a quick speed out, we're just getting it out there, and he doesn't get a lot of depth from his center, and if there's that push, that can push him right back into the pocket and push the quarterback back. He doesn't get a ton of depth seemingly in some of those first steps. Even from the gun, it didn't always look the same when he was dropping back. Not really sure what kind of zip he can actually put on the ball for like tight window type of throws. Sometimes you look at it and you say, well, maybe you like to see maybe more zip on that than rather than the touch pass. But he does show nice touch pass ability. But I don't know if we're going to see any rockets. I think it is important to remember with this edition what the Lions are looking for. They're just looking for a guy that can be serviceable, basically, I guess, make the plays that are there. He doesn't need to be a game changer offensively, but if there's an opportunity to make a play because it's there, make that play. Make the routine throws 90% of the time look routine, right? We can't have it 60% of the time you're hitting that route that's supposed to be hit, because then you're in 2nd and 10. It should have been 2nd and 5. Now we're in 2nd and 10. You had an easy out route, right? Just a specific example to spot in my head. Last year, we had a pass, week 1, we threw it to Khalif, and he dropped the pass. It's like that. You drop that pass, okay, now all of a sudden we're in 2nd and 10. What happens if our next run goes for 2 yards? Okay, now we're in 3rd and long. So you don't want to have those. So we just need to make the routine plays when they're there, and that's what the Lions are looking for. They're going to try to take the ball out of that quarterback's hands, I think, as much as possible when they can if they're in that situation like they did last year. And while Tim Boyle showed, I thought, some of that last year of like, okay, you know, there's improvement here. He has ways to go, but there's some improvement. The consistency really didn't come along this year. You just did not see it this year. And really, if you just specifically look at that last preseason game and you could throw a number to it, Lions were 4 for 17 on 3rd down in that game. 4 for 17. I counted multiple big 3rd and long pickups that Nate Sudfeld had just in those 3 games in the preseason with the 49ers in that small sample size. Lions were 4 for 17, and one of those with a 3rd and 17 pickup by Jermar Jefferson on a draw. And a guy that's potentially their future, right? If they want to try to do that with these guys that are available, you go get that guy, you put him on your practice squad. And if you look at the market, it was either, yeah, you could go get a guy with more in-game experience, but probably that guy that you're getting with more in-game experience probably just isn't very good. I mean, there wasn't names out there that were like, well, that guy, he makes more sense. It's a little bit of a rejection, but based on what I've seen, I will say that, you know, he didn't really seem to miss the easy passes. Like, he was pretty darn accurate from what I noticed, and he seemed to be pretty in control and in command, and it looks like he's shown some growth. Based on what I've seen, I will say that it found their serviceable backup quarterback. We'll have to see what it turns out and what happens with this. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But I do believe from what I've seen of this, the consistency seems to be there, where this is what the Lions are looking for. This is a guy that seems to be, in their eyes, a clear upgrade over what we had, and I feel pretty good about this addition and feel pretty comfortable. I know there's not a lot of experience, and hopefully we don't have to see him at all. That would be ideal, but I do like this addition for the Lions. Lions also do have Trinity Benson, who was waived injured. He made it back to our IR, and the Lions actually agreed to an injury settlement, which means that he is now available. He is a free agent, so he's not with us anymore, so I thought I would just point that out. You also have guys like Kevin Jarvis, Ja'Shawn Cornell, CJ Moore, which is unfortunate, and Eric Banks all out for the season as they are on IR. So very unfortunate there that those 4 guys, they had revert back to the IR, and now they're out for the year. I don't really know for all these guys what they're dealing with. Like Ja'Shawn Cornell, I don't know what season-ending injury he's dealing with. CJ Moore, it seemed like he was on the path to come back, and it must be some sort of setback that now he's out for the year. Pretty major setback. Kevin Jarvis, he's been injured for a little while, and then also Eric Banks was kind of recent. So very unfortunate for those guys. You hate to see it, but they're out for the year for the Lions. So with that being said, that is your Lions' latest news. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching. I'm out.